We're starting lesson number 9, which is the exile and return of the Jews from and to Jerusalem after Babylonian captivity. In lesson 8, we touched on it a little bit. There's a lot of overlapping of events and characters that for example, as we're talking about the kings and everything, we have Elijah and we have Elisha, but we also have Isaiah the prophet, which has his own book. And we're going to see a lot more of that in this lesson here, in lesson number 9. We're going to talk about a lot of the characters that are involved with the deportation of the Jews from Jerusalem. And we talked about that a little bit already in lesson 8, where you can see where Daniel and Ezekiel were part of the first 2 deportations to Babylon. We're going to talk about it a little bit more because there's a lot of overlapping of character, and we'll see from different perspectives. We'll read some of in 2 Kings and maybe in Chronicles of what all happened, but also we'll get different perspectives from different prophets on their own books that we'll touch on. So the Babylonian captivity. Number 1, why is God allowing King Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon to take over Judah? Yes, ma'am.
Because of their idolatry, and they turned their back on God.
That's right. As we've seen with the very few kings that have been good, most of them have been evil, and God's fed up. He said, hey, this is enough. So if this happens, though, and we have Babylon taking over Judah, how is the Messianic thing supposed to happen through King David if they're all wiped out and Jerusalem's destroyed, the temple's destroyed? I mean, how is that possible? How is that going to be still come true? I mean, what happens?
I'll bring you back in 70 years.
Okay. Right. And we're going to see how our little finite minds can't really even comprehend what all is going to happen. But God makes it happen with a plethora of different characters and different job duties that each one of them have to make all this come together. After we think all is lost, and look at Jeremiah and Lamentations, how woe is us, and we're sorrow, and all this stuff, where they see their, I wouldn't, this is definitely not the same, but think about our country. If we had the Washington Monument, the White House, everything destroyed, somebody else come and taken most of our people away from this country, and we could look at the desolated place and go, how in the world are we ever going to rebuild this? How can this withstand time? We just think it's all over, and this is what it is in Jerusalem on a much bigger scale, because this is God's people. But the Babylonian captivity happens in 3 waves, right? We talked about that the other day. The first wave of deportation or captivity or exile was in 605 BC. And who was part of that? What main character do we read about that was part of that first wave of captives? Daniel, right? Again, it touches on him here, but Daniel has his own book from his perspective that we're going to read about later, of what all he went through during this time. But Daniel was in this first exile. The second happened in 597 BC, and who was part of that deportation? You remember? Who? Ezekiel, right? And again, he was part of this, and he also has his own book. So there's a lot of things going on here, different perspectives. During this time, if you remember back in lesson 8, there was a chart on page 93, I think it started in page 92 and 93. It breaks down the kings of Israel and Judah. But on page 93, on the very bottom, that last chart, the last several kings of Judah, it names Jehoiakim, number 18. It shows that he dies, and also Jehoiachin is taken in captivity during this time. All right, the third wave was around 586 BC. Does anybody know who one of the main characters is there that got taken? He's not a prophet, but he's a leader. It's Zedekiah, the last king. Let's read 2 Kings 25. 2 Kings 25. Now Zedekiah was placed in charge after Jehoiachin was taken. King Nebuchadnezzar said, okay, you're going to be the king here in Judah, but you're going to report to me. And number one, he was an evil king, and also he was not listening to King Nebuchadnezzar and doing whatever he wanted to. So he wasn't listening to God or King Nebuchadnezzar, and he was and King Nebuchadnezzar didn't like that. So Zedekiah is taken, but 2 Kings 25, verses 6 and 7, it says, then they captured the king, Zedekiah, and brought him to the king of Babylon, which is Nebuchadnezzar, at Riblah, and he passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, then put out the eyes of Zedekiah and bound him with bronze fetters and brought him to Babylon. So not only did they just take him captive, he takes his sons and slaughters them right in front of his eyes. And just so that is the last thing that he ever sees, then they pluck his eyeballs out. I mean, that is just, I can't even fathom to have that to be the last memory of things that I saw of. So this is Nebuchadnezzar's doing it, but it's by God's allowing it to happen because he was such an evil king. So this is where we're at. And then we have the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So there's a lot going on during this time period. So as Randall mentioned, the Babylonian captivity lasted approximately 70 years, and that can shift a little. Depending on if you're looking at the first deportation or the destruction of Jerusalem, but somewhere around there, it's around 70 years of Babylonian captivity. So who was who put an end to Babylon? Cyrus the Great. What do we know about Cyrus the Great?
He was great.
That's right. Cyrus was great. Why was he great?
He let Israel rebuild their.
Okay. Yep. He allowed Judah to. So basically, the Babylonians, pretty ruthless, as we can see what they did to Zedekiah, and they're taking over the land, and they're destroying Jerusalem, destroying the temple, and not just this area. They've done it to a lot of areas, right? But Persia, Cyrus built a great nation in Persia and came and they defeated the Babylonians. Now Cyrus kind of went about things a little bit differently. Even though he was taking over land, it's almost like he had compassion also at the same time for the people that he was taking over, because it was almost like he was a human rights activist back in that time. Even though he was taking over land, I respect your faith. I respect that you want to serve your God, however that is, for whatever land it is. So Cyrus felt compassion for the Jews and allowed them to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple and worship God the way that they needed to and wanted to. And we see Cyrus mentioned many times in Scripture. Turn with me to Ezra. Ezra chapter 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, now this is Ezra, so this is looking back, and this is Ezra's historical writings about Cyrus. So this is looking back. This is after Cyrus. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all he has appointed to me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which he is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all of his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Every survivor, at whatever place he may live, let the men of that place support him with silver and gold and goods and cattle, together with a free will, offering for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem." Then the heads of their fathers' households of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites arose, and everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up to rebuild the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. All those about them encouraged them with articles of silver, with gold, with goods, with cattle, with valuables, aside from all that was given a free will offering. Also, King Cyrus brought out the articles of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and put in the house of his gods. And Cyrus, the king of Persia, had them brought out by the hand of Mithridath, the treasurer, and counted them to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. Now this was their number: 30 gold dishes, 1,000 silver dishes, 29 duplicates, 30 gold bowls, 410 silver bowls of a second kind, and 1,000 other articles. All the articles of gold and silver numbered 5,400. Sheshbazzar brought them all up with the exiles who went up from Babylon to Jerusalem. And then it goes on to having a census and who all was in that return. Let's look at 2 Chronicles chapter 36. 2 Chronicles chapter 36. starting in verse 22. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all of his kingdom and put it into writing. And this is basically the same thing that we just read in Ezra. Now, I'll say this. Number one, it says, you notice, to fulfill the word of the Lord from Jeremiah. It's fulfilling prophecy. And also, I want to point out about the proclamation sent throughout all the kingdom. You know, if a political leader has a viewpoint on something, they're generally going to have a declaration or a proclamation about whatever, but it's probably not just going to be in that one document. It's going to be shown throughout several documents throughout their political career. If somebody believes strongly on a subject, they're going to have multiple documents about this thing, right? So here we see that it's specifically talking about the Jewish people and going back to Jerusalem. One thing I want to point out, anybody know what this is? Huh?
That's from Babylon, isn't it? This is the cylinder.
No, this is Cyrus's cylinder. And on this cylinder, there's an inscription. And this was found in about 1879, I believe it was, in Babylon. You remember he took over Babylon, but they found it's kind of a barrel-shaped clay pottery with inscriptions all the way around it. And they found it in the walls or in the foundation of one of the buildings in Babylon. But on this inscription, after you take it apart and kind of fold it out, and then I can't read it, but there's some smart people who did translate this. It talks about Cyrus and his proclamation and all. It doesn't specifically talk about the Jews and Jerusalem, but it does talk about his caring about respecting others' religious beliefs and basically caring for other people and giving them free will and human rights and not having slavery and things like this. And this is kind of a precursor to other human rights activists that we currently have today. This was like the first part of how to treat people, and people often go back to this as a precursor to this. But this matches up with what we're reading in the Bible. You know, what we're reading in the Bible is Cyrus said a proclamation that said, "Hey, we're gonna allow the Jewish people to go back to Jerusalem and build the temple and worship their God like they're supposed to." And then we find this. And it matches up with that belief system that Cyrus had in his proclamation to allow different ones to go back after he conquered, to give them their own free will and be compassionate about them and their beliefs. So this matches up with the Bible. And this is the same thing that we talked about last week with the tunnel. You know, we read about it in the Bible, and then almost 2,000 years later, or longer, we find this tunnel that we read about, you know, and it's the same thing with this. And the reason why this was in the foundation or in the walls is back then, and we might do something similar to this. I know when me and Jennifer did some work on our house, we would take current day newspapers and stuff them in the walls. That way, if the wall ever got tore down, you can kind of see, hey, this was back in 1998 or 2004, whatever year it was. And they did the same type thing back then, only more of a christening, right? It was more of a, they would take a document like this and put it in the foundation. Upon this creed or proclamation or declaration, this is what we're all about. And this is how they found this, was they found it in the wall or the foundation of a building in Babylon, and more than likely that's why that was there. It was almost like a time capsule, and we were able to find it 1879 or thereabouts, and we read about it, but it's very, very much like what we read about Cyrus in the Bible. He's talked about it in a good light, even though he was a king and he took over. He was very compassionate towards the Jewish people. Let's turn to Isaiah.
One thing that amazes me is the fact that they've been in captivity for 70 years, and they can still remember their genealogy, what tribe was I from, things like that. You know, you're 70 years old. You don't remember who your grandfather or great grandfather or great great grandfather.
Right.
And yet they remembered what tribe they were from. There must have been some training, some remembrance, some documents that they kept, the Jews kept, to know, okay, who's a Levite?
Yeah.
What is a Levite?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know really what our family background is. You know, I've heard Wales, Ireland, Scotland, somewhere over there, but I don't even know what country, where our family's really from. Yeah, and there's a lot of intermixing and marrying and stuff like that happened years and years ago. But they took that very, very serious. They took that to heart. You know, they took it with a lot of pride that I'm a Benjamin. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. I'm from a tribe of Judah. I'm from this tribe and that tribe. And they weren't supposed to be intermarrying with different other races too, like the Canaanites and things like that. But they took a lot of pride in that. So with that, I'm from so-and-so and I'm from so-and-so. And a lot of it was word of mouth. We've lost that, through the years too. All right, so let's look at Isaiah chapter 44 and 45. Go down to the last verse of 44, which is verse 28. And we won't read all of this, but this is just an example of Cyrus being mentioned in the Bible. Verse 28 of chapter 44. It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple your foundation will be laid. Thus says the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed, whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him, and to loose the loins of kings, to open doors before him so the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make the rough places smooth. I will shatter the doors of bronze and cut through their iron bars. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. All right, let's talk about Cyrus. Anybody want to take a stab at why this is very unique?
Because it happened a long time before Cyrus was even there.
Happened a long time before Cyrus was even around.
At least 200 years.
Yep. So 150 to 200 years before Cyrus. And he calls him by name. And it says that God, and this isn't even a Jewish person. This is a pagan king that God is going to use outside of the nation of Israel. He's going to use him to be able to help Judah rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. And it says, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple your foundation will be laid. But not only did Isaiah prophesy about Cyrus, but by name. And that's a God thing. So Ezra, 2nd Chronicles, Daniel, all of those that are talking about Cyrus is looking back at Cyrus and writing what they experienced, what they saw, what they know. Isaiah is prophesying 150, 200 years before Cyrus is even here. Huge. Did you have something, Greg?
Well, I don't know if we have time to remain really
Yep.
get in depth on this, but
the fact that Cyrus has made this promise, and God tells him that, you know, this is not even a Jew. He's telling him, look, you're going to know, and here's how you're going to know that I'm sending you. First of all, like you said, he calls him by name.
Right.
And Jerusalem is rebuilt. So he can even be confident, not even being in covenant with God, that he is prospering because of Yahweh. Because of that, because his son and his grandson knows that story, they have a, and they all wanted to have either make themselves out to be deity or to be guided by the language of a letter that went back and forth to Alexander the Great when it was time for Greece to take over the world. The language of between Alexander the Great himself and Darius, the great or whatever grandson, I think it's the fourth or the third, I get them mixed up. Anyway, is no. The one true God is with me. So they were arguing over whether or not God was still, and by the way, it's not a pagan thing. I just find it interesting that in this ancient letter, it doesn't say your God stinks, my God's real. They're arguing over who the real God is with.
Right.
That
Not who the
language
real
is,
God is. But
yeah,
who the
so
real
it's
God
still
is.
fresh
Yeah.
on their mind because it's his grandfather who did this amazing thing
Right.
that called Cyrus out. So obviously God is with his grandson, not you, Alexander.
Right.
And of course, we know because of Daniel prophesying that Alexander the Great, not calling Alexander by name, but nevertheless Greece
Right.
would take over the world, that he made that promise to Cyrus, not necessarily Cyrus's grandson.
Right.
But they're arguing in this ancient letter, saying, you better do what I say, because God's with me. The God.
Right. Yeah.
I am his agent.
Right.
Well, Cyrus got that attitude, and he rightfully should.
Right.
Because God not only sent him, but he called him by name and then proved it to him with those secret things.
Right. Yep.
It's a fascinating thing about history.
Yeah.
I love that you brought out the archaeological history. There's so much history,
Yep.
documentation that verifies our faith,
That's right.
that corroborates Scripture. It's beautiful. It's just the best word that I can come up with is beauty. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
The way the Bible is corroborated, but academia doesn't like to mention that.
Yeah, that's right. And there's so many of these other books that you'll find, you know, if like Ezra and Nehemiah, you know, that there might be some mentioning of other prophets in their book that, you know, sometimes you can see them intertwining like that, and it backs up who they are. And they back up who they are, and they back up the events and things like that. So it's not just within Scripture that it's doing that. Then we find other things outside of that back it up also, just like this cylinder from Cyrus, you know, and his decree and proclamation that he made. So it's really interesting. But this Isaiah thing, you know, a couple hundred years before Cyrus is even here, he mentioned what's going to happen, and he mentions him by name, not just, hey, there's going to be a great power that comes up that's going to rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, we don't know who that power is going to be, but no, it tells by name who it's going to be, and that I thought that was pretty fascinating. Not that anything we read in the Bible should be surprising to us, really, you know. All right, so I want to talk about some prophets and priests and key figures throughout this whole exile, captivity, and return. We've already talked about Daniel, right? So 605 BC, he was in part of the first deportation, and then Ezekiel was in the 597 BC second deportation. And then we have Jeremiah. And the dates on that, and if you remember BC, the smaller the number, the closer to Christ, right? So we're going downward. So 605, 597, 586 BC. He was eyewitness to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. So, not everybody in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas was exiled to Babylon. Most were, but there were a few left behind. And I believe Jeremiah was left behind because he saw all the destruction of Jerusalem. He saw the destruction of the temple. And we can see that in Lamentations. But it does, in the scriptures, it does say that some were left behind to plow the fields and to work the areas and things like that. But most of the people were deported, but not all. Then we have Cyrus. We just got finished talking about Cyrus, key figure. So in 539 BC, he is the Persian king that defeated the Babylonians. And who knows, all right, after they're in captivity for 70 years and Cyrus takes over and he says, hey, I'm going to let you go back to Jerusalem to build your temple. Who is the main character that leads the first group back to Jerusalem to start rebuilding the temple? Does anybody remember?
Nehemiah.
Who?
Nehemiah.
Nope, not yet. Go ahead.
Zerubbabel.
Zerubbabel.
Priest.
Zerubbabel. Okay? So around 538, 520, led the first group back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple was the main focus, right? So you can imagine the first group that goes back after 70 years, you go back to Jerusalem and go to the temple and everything's destroyed. Everything is, what a sad, depressing, I mean, I can't even imagine, going back to your hometown or your worship place or coming back, Americans coming back and seeing all of what we feel like, hey, this is what we stand for as America, having, coming back and seeing what has been done to our country. And this is even greater than that because this is their sacred worship place, temple that Solomon built that they were proud of. So they laid the foundation for the new temple. But between 530 BC and 522 BC, we see some setbacks and delays. Anybody know what those setbacks and delays might be?
The neighboring countries,
What about the neighboring countries?
they belittle them, they attack them,
Yep.
they're being a pain.
Yep. What else?
They were afraid they were gonna start ruling.
Afraid what?
They were afraid they were gonna start ruling again.
Afraid they were going to start ruling again? What else?
This is later. They sent letters back to the king in power and say, guess what they're doing?
Yeah. Who was the king in power?
Was it Cyrus by that point?
That's one of the problems. Cyrus died.
Oh, okay.
Is it-
Cyrus must have died around 530 BC. So now we have Darius the First in power. So there's some changing of the guards, right? And so we have some. So where Cyrus was, hey, you go rebuild your temple, and the got the ball rolling. Well, they laid the foundation, and then they started having problems, outside problems. The other country, neighboring countries, the change of power in Persia and things like that. But we also see that Cyrus is no longer. And what happened? Does y'all remember what happened with Joseph when Pharaoh died and changing the guards? Well, now the new Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph, doesn't know, so there was a problem there. Same thing here. So Darius is now in charge. Well, he comes across, he finds Cyrus's decree and provided, and then so he changed and and provided resources and support for the completion of the temple's construction. But there was a little bit of a delay there. Now, during this delay, we have Haggai and Zechariah, right? They have their own books, remember? Haggai and Zechariah? They have their own books later that we'll see. But during this time, 520 BC, Haggai and Zechariah both encouraged Zerubbabel and the people to continue rebuilding the temple after many years of neglect. There was about 20 years after they laid the foundation for the new temple that there was a stall or a neglect of continuing to rebuild the temple. So Haggai and Zechariah are both on the scene trying to get Zerubbabel, hey, come on, y'all can do this. We gotta do this. And not only are they encouraging Zerubbabel, but they're also telling the people, look, y'all built your own houses and y'all are living fine, but yeah, look at this temple. Y'all stopped. Why did you stop? Keep going. Then it took them about 4 years after that, and it was completed. So about 516, 515, somewhere in that range, the temple was finally completed. All right, so there's the temple, but we still don't have Jerusalem built back up yet, right? So we have Ezra. So 458 BC, the same year Artaxerxes first became king of Persia. So now we have Cyrus, and we had Darius, and now we have Artaxerxes. Ezra was high priest and scribe and a direct descendant of Aaron. And Artaxerxes allowed him to bring another group back to Jerusalem. This time Ezra is mainly focused on religious and community reforms. So now we have the temple that's rebuilt. So now in comes Ezra to focus on getting them back to worshiping God the way they're supposed to, and community reforms. And also during this time we have Nehemiah, right? And Nehemiah was about 445 BC, and he was basically the overseer of rebuilding the city walls. And Artaxerxes helped fund the effort. Why did he help fund the effort? Real quick side note, both Ezra and Nehemiah, we believe, were born in exile. They had never seen Jerusalem or the temple. They were born in exile during the 70-year captivity. Nehemiah was a Jewish leader who played a crucial role in the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls after the Babylonian exile. He was a high official in the Persian court, serving as the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. So, just like other times that we've seen in Scripture, even though Nehemiah was a Jewish leader, even though he was a Jew, he served a high position for the Persian court, just like others that we've read about, that Joseph working his way up and being a high official for a totally different country, for a pharaoh. So this isn't uncommon, but he was a Jewish leader, but yet was held in high esteem by the king of Persia, Artaxerxes. When Nehemiah heard about the city's ruins, he was granted permission and resources by the king to return and oversee the rebuilding of the project. He went to King Artaxerxes and said, please allow me to go back and help build the city. And he asked him, well, how long are you going to be gone? He basically turned in a leave of absence and told him, hey, I'll be gone from this time to this time. And he kept word with that, and then he went back. But he said, okay, not only am I going to let you go, but I'm going to give you all these things to help you in your efforts. And guess what? I'm going to give you, I'm going to have a problem traveling to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to go through cities where they might not let me go through. And he sent word and sent letters and said, hey, let him pass, let him pass. And he helped him get back to Jerusalem and helped him rebuild the city. Malachi. So Malachi is further out, 445 to 425 BC. He basically, and he has his own book. He rebuked the people of Israel for their spiritual apathy and covenant violations while offering hope and restoration and foreshadowing the coming of a messenger who would prepare the way for the Lord. Who is he prophesying about there? John the Baptist and Jesus. The book highlights God's enduring love for Israel despite their failings and promises future blessings if they return to him. Malachi confronts the Israelites with their sins, specifically addressing their lack of reverence for God, their corrupt worship practices, and their disregard for the covenant. All right, so during the exiles and the captivity and the returning back to Jerusalem, we talked about a lot of different characters, a lot of different influential characters that are mentioned in the Bible, right? Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Zerubbabel, Haggai, Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi. I mean, if you want to put a dream team together about who's to do what, everybody had their specific roles. God put all this in place. So you have the Babylonians that come in and they totally destroy Jerusalem, exile the people, totally destroy the temple, and you wonder, how is God's plan going to happen now? And he takes a group like these guys to say, hey, here's what I need you to do, here's what I need you to do here, and here's how it's going to happen. And if you think about it, the only one here that doesn't have his own book is Zerubbabel here. Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi all have their own books that we can read about and their perspectives about what all happened. And just to have these guys, God knew exactly what he was doing, and a lot of these guys lived during the same time period with each other, probably knew each other. Some of them even reflect back to each other in their own books and mentions each other. But if you wanted a dream team of how to put Jerusalem and the temple back together, this was God's plan here, and God worked through these guys. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and like I said, there's a lot of overlapping that, before I really dove into this, I knew some of this was happening, but not to this extent in such a short amount of time. You're looking at probably, I guess was it about 100 years time from rebuilding Jerusalem to Malachi, I think it is. The start of the first group that came back to Jerusalem all the way to Malachi, you're looking at about 100 years. So you think about 100 years with these guys, there's some overlapping of time that they knew each other, and I just think that was pretty amazing that we can see all this. Like I said before, the Bible is 66 books, and they're all their individual books, and this is basically a library and a catalog. We don't necessarily read them in chronological order. We have them grouped, like we talked about, poetry, and grouped it. So you might have to flip over here, but that guy lived back here, and so there's some overlapping, and it's hard sometimes to capture all that in your head. But if you spell it out, look how many of these guys all lived together at the same time. So we see in 2 Kings, and we see in Ezra, and all of their own books that they all went through this time period of Judah's exiles and return. So, does anybody have any questions or comments before we close up?
Think about trying to keep your head in the game for 100 years to get something done.
That's right.
It's hard to keep your head straight just to rebuild a house in a year.
That's right.
Think of 100 years,
Yeah.
overlapping different people.
Yeah. While you're trying to battle outside sources or outside forces and all these other things, and keep the faith, and as you can see, some of these things were done just as Jeremiah prophesied, or just as Isaiah, and they refer back to prophecies. So God said it was going to happen, and they're seeing everything unfold right before their eyes, and they're part of it.